Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. I'm so happy to welcome the students from my international management class, the communication studies class, and everyone tuning in for this special alumni webinar. We are thrilled to have you with us today. My name is Young Sun Pak, Professor of International Business and Management at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles and Director of the Center for International Business Education. Today's program is supported by a grant from the U.S. Department of Education. LMU is one of only 16 universities in the nation awarded this very prestigious CIBE grant, and our undergraduate and graduate international business programs are both ranked number 10 nationally. We organized this webinar to celebrate International Education Week, a joint initiative of the U.S. Department of State and Department of Education to promote global learning, language study, and cultural exchange. Today's webinar, titled The Impact of AI on Multilingual Virtual Teams Communication, is a wonderful example of this initiative. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Dr. Helene Tenzer is one of the most prominent international human resource scholars. She's a professor of international management at LMU, Ludwig Maximilians Universität, Munich School of Management in Germany. Her scholarship focuses on the human factor in multinational corporations and addresses current issues at the intersection of international management, organizational behavior, and human resource management. Her research interests include language diversity in multinational organizations, multilingual and virtual teams, leadership in multinational organizations. She has published numerous articles in top journals in international business and management. Guten Abend, Professor Tenzer. Dr. Tenzer, thank you so much. I think.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today and to speak to you about the topic that fascinates me most in research at this moment. So let me share my screen. Can you wait a moment? Sorry, it has thrown me out. Here we go.
Okay.
I want to start introducing the people that I'm working on this topic with. So you can see that Stefan Feuerriegel, he's a tech guy. So he programs AI for business applications and tests it. Rebecca Piecari is a founding figure in international business research about language diversity and language barriers. Nina is an organizational behavior scholar who studies the relational impact of AI use, and Umnia is a current PhD student who was involved in our first empirical project on the issue. So the background for today's talk is that we see more and more global virtual teamwork that is multilingual, because business activities are more and more globally networked and they are more and more technology driven. And those virtual teams, well, they are used to innovate globally and to coordinate the activities of multinational companies worldwide. Now, they have existed already before COVID, but after the pandemic have had a huge push in their prevalence. And well, in earlier years, they have used computer-mediated communication. So they used communication media such as Zoom, as we do now, but also traditional email, SharePoints, maybe instant messaging. So a mix of media that had in common that it was real people, like humans, writing or speaking messages. So this was only humans communicating, basically. Now we have seen a recent switch towards more and more AI-mediated communication, meaning that virtual team members, they use AI tools to augment their communication, but these tools are active agents in also shaping, influencing how people communicate, and they influence also the content as they become a mediator. Now, that has enormous potential, particularly for multilingual teams, to reduce language barriers. I'll present you the amazing capabilities of AI tools in a multilingual environment in a minute, but there are still uncertainties at this point. So the technology has clear limitations in terms of its language capabilities, and that might actually reduce its effectiveness to actually facilitate understanding. And another uncertainty is the human factor. How do people react to increasing involvement of AI in their work? Do they embrace it? Do they adopt it eagerly and competently? Or are they rather resistant and fearing AI as like a threatening new technology? So I want to explore with you a few scenarios depending on where the technology and the human factor might go. First of all, the capabilities, some examples of what AI can do for multilingual virtual teams. Well, speech recognition is already very helpful in, for example, transcribing video call conversations so that people can read it at their own pace afterwards. But becomes especially interesting when combined with machine translation. Then we can create instant subtitles as people are speaking. So you could have me subtitled in your mother tongue, if that's not English. So this can also be very helpful for like synchronous communication. After an endless meeting, the AI can summarize the main points in the language of your choice to facilitate like information reception. And if you're not speaking but writing, it can edit. I mean, you've all seen spell checking, grammar suggestions, but there are also language editing tools in live conversations that give suggestions on adjusting the pacing, the tone, the word choices to be more understandable. And language generation, I trust that you as students are eagerly using generative AI, probably for your term papers and other assignments. So you know that based on some prompting ideas, you can create a full text and say, well, make that a sales pitch, make it a project brochure, make it a motivational team email in the language that you wish. So great potential, but it's not perfect. And it's important to know that it's not perfect, particularly when it comes to cross-cultural communication, because every language and the culture behind it embodies a social system. And well, certain concepts have different meanings, or maybe the concepts don't even exist in another language. So you might have heard of guanxi. That's actually a rather complex Chinese concept of relationship building in business, the reciprocity that's involved, and the investments you make and the benefits you are likely to get back. Well, there's no one word in any other language that would describe this. Or some concepts are completely different in how people understand them. So colleagues have tried to translate a US American handbook of knowledge management into Russian. And they really struggled to find a term that would be equivalent to knowledge management, which kind of has the connotation that it's good to share knowledge, to have it flow through the entire organization. Because, well, in Russian, it's more like the connotation knowledge is power. I hoard it and I use it strategically. Why should I share it with everyone? So what does the AI do if you input concepts like this? Or politeness, for example. In English, you address people with you, even the president, for example. In German, we have two forms. We have du as a more like informal among friends. You have sie as a more formal form of address. But in Japanese, you have so many different ways to address people in different politeness levels, from the emperor down to a little kid. So language is even more complex there. Members from different cultures might use language differently to express meaning. We Germans, we are famous for being rather direct. Others would say blunt or rude. That's just how we point out problems. In other more face-saving cultures, people would phrase things very differently. Well, if this gets lost in AI translation, a lot of misunderstandings can arise, and, well, new misunderstandings that might not have happened before. Or the way large, like commercially available AI models are trained can make a difference in their performance. So the bulk of training data we have in ChatGPT, but also in like competition models, is actually from English-speaking countries. So it performs wonderfully in English, but not that well in languages where it has less training data. I mean, it's pretty good now in languages with a lot of investment going on. French, Spanish, German, very good. But in other languages, especially like smaller ones, say there are so many different African languages. Some are just not covered. So it can't work in those languages, and people might get left behind who are native speakers of that language. More importantly, in my view, is even that AI soaks up human biases and stereotypes and cliches through the training data that it crawls from the internet or takes from historical texts. So ChatGPT has read all American literature of the 19th century, and, well, gender roles might have been different back then compared to what they are now. Or, I mean, look at internet forum conversations. They are full of human stereotypes, and that gets reproduced in AI output. So there was a study, for example, where colleagues asked or prompted ChatGPT to create reference letters for two different candidates. One candidate named Kelly, a female, the other named Joseph, a male, and that's the only thing they varied. Well, the reference letter that Kelly got praised her as a very warm person, a team player, great to work with. And Joseph was praised for being a leader, being decisive, taking charge. Well, you see the stereotypes coming in there, and you can consider who will then be hired for a high-level position. So these were the technological issues. Then we also have the human factor, obviously. So how does it affect certain team processes? Let's say communication patterns. We can see, if we use AI-generated language, that everyone sounds about similar, right? Everything's aligned somehow to, well, let's say Anglo-centric communication patterns that are very linear, very concise. But people from other cultures, well, they might have different, maybe more circular argumentation patterns. We could say it's good to standardize communication patterns because maybe it's easier for people to understand each other. But you could also say that diversity gets lost And it might be the diversity, the multiple perspectives, the different approaches that create the many good ideas and the innovation. So it could also be a downside. Communication resources. So typically in multilingual team communication, people draw on everything they have. I'm a native speaker of German. I speak decent English. I speak some Spanish. I speak some French. And I might use all that whenever it helps me communicate. Well, do I just add the translation capabilities of AI to my language portfolio, so to say? Or do I get lazy? Do I say, well, why do I even have to study foreign languages if AI does it all for me? So if people get too complacent, it might reduce their communication abilities in face-to-face communication, you know? Or, sorry, my slide is no longer changing. There we go. Emotions in the team might be affected also very differently. We could say we could have a positive emotional effect if nobody has to be afraid anymore of maybe losing face or making a fool out of themselves by speaking non-perfect lingua franca. And typically the lingua franca is English in business, right? And my research has clearly shown that this is an anxiety issue for non-native speakers because they just feel inferior. This could go away with AI support. That's good for the emotional climate. But I think you all have met those people who are very hesitant, very resistant, even fear artificial intelligence. Well, because some people are generally afraid of change. Maybe they have watched too much Terminator, right? Think it will destroy the world in the end. Or they might be afraid that they will be replaced by the AI, might lose their jobs. Or they are just afraid that they can't keep up with the technology and will embarrass themselves by not being able to master the tools. So this could introduce a new kind of anxiety. Trust formation. Trust relationships are very important for teams to function, to work together. And my research has shown, that was actually my first big paper that I published, that language barriers impede trust formation because you can't really see the competence of low language proficiency speakers. I mean, expressed bluntly, you think they are less intelligent or don't consider them an expert because they don't speak so eloquently. Or if there are language misunderstandings, you think they are unreliable when they just didn't understand what was agreed upon in the meeting. So those barriers to trust formation could be reduced by the AI support. But then again, research has shown that when you get messages where you clearly see that they are AI generated or AI assisted with the long dashes, you know, then those messages are seen as less credible and the competence of the person sending them is rated down. So you think the person is less benevolent, less hardworking, less competent if they send you messages that are clearly AI generated. So there might be new trust problems coming in. Equitable access to team communication. At first glance, you could say it's definitely an equity booster. If everyone can now participate more easily with all the translation, editing, summarization, text generation support, and native speakers maybe no longer dominate conversations so much. But there could also be new inequities. Maybe in some corners of the world, people don't have equal access to the latest AI tools and technologies. And then they are like doubly left behind if the technology is so important now to be part of the team. Or think of older employees who might find it hard to always keep up to date with the latest technology, who just don't catch on to the tools that fast, who have lower AI literacy, so to say. They could also be left behind. Inclusion is a very similar, very related topic. You could say it promotes inclusive communication. Regardless of what is your mother tongue, you can be part of the team conversation with all the AI support. But maybe the inclusion agenda could also suffer from the biases that AI has embedded and reproduces in the language it generates. I had the example of gender bias before, but AI has also proven to have, at least like the current models could all improve, right? Was also proven to have cultural or ethnic, racial biases. And well, maybe that's behind what we have already achieved. What does that do to the inclusion climate in a team? So the effects, as you see, are rather ambivalent. And based on that, we could think of several scenarios materializing, depending on whether the technology will advance, like will the training data be diversified, more languages included, debiasing methods applied. I mean, AI research is working on that, but my colleague Stefan says, we'll never completely get rid of that. Also hallucinations, we'll never be able to eliminate that fully, but we can get better. So how much does the technology get better? And also, how will team members approach the AI? Will they have a positive attitude, adopt it, but also like critically and adopt it in an informed way? Or will they reject it, try to control it, keep it out of the team? So we could think of different scenarios. And they are, of course, exaggerations. And in reality, you will probably find some mix between them. But I think they stimulate us thinking about possible effects. And of course, the utopian scenario that we would all love to see is that the technology is polished, close to perfection, and that people are also, like everyone on a team, will be willing and able to integrate it into their daily work. And then we could really see an improvement, saying language barriers go down and communication becomes more inclusive. If people critically scrutinize what the AI does, maybe correct the remaining biases, use their own intercultural competence and language resources in combination with the AI. That's the scenario we would love to see. Now, if the technology gets better, but people will still reject it, then we'll rather have a discourse on people trying to limit it, trying to control it, always focusing on remaining small shortcomings. And then maybe those who don't speak the team language so fluently will use it in secret. And if that's discovered, yeah, there are new inequities. So that could be like a negative team dynamic. What if shortcomings remain? Biases, unequal language coverages, but people are super enthusiastic. You could also think about that. Well, then maybe people use it uncritically. AI errors happen, and if people are so like fans and so infatuated in a way with the AI, they might say if an error comes up, it must be the people. It must be the team colleagues. So those misunderstandings can also impair the team climate. Or the worst case, basically the dystopian scenario, we have shortcomings and we have people really trying to like crack down on it, reduce AI use. Well, then we have a more negative discourse than we would have before, which hopefully doesn't happen, right? So this was conceptual work. What we did then, and this is our first empirical step, right? It's still very new, is we did an experiment. We had people, we had five Americans in a large technology company write emails that they would write to their supervisor if they want to request a deadline extension, if they have to refuse, let's say, an evening assignment because of family commitment, if they want to contradict a solution that the leader has proposed, and so on. So difficult communication situations. We put those through ChatGPT asking to translate to Japanese. The first prompt was just translate to Japanese. The second prompt was more sophisticated, saying, take the role of a skilled bilingual translator. The target audience is a Japanese supervisor. Make sure you use language patterns that are appropriate for this context. And the third prompt was very long in Japanese business etiquette. You need to use, let's say, job title and last name as a form of address. You do this, you do that. So a very long, like, primer on Japanese business etiquette. Then we qualitatively coded how much did the language structures change. And we found that in the just translate prompt, the naive prompt, so to say, it translated very literally. So if it was like, dear Tomoki, like first name address, in the English original, it said basically the same in Japanese, which is very inappropriate when addressing a supervisor in a company. So this was basically Japanese, but in American speech structures. If we gave a bit more context, what we call the audience targeted prompt, then we saw a jump towards more Japan specific language patterns. So more like apology prefaces, more correct forms of address, more like humble verbs. So the honorifics used more competently. And that increased even more with the business etiquette prompt. And in the next step, I show that here with the cultural fit. We did an online experiment with 50 Japanese, had them rate, well, how appropriate are those translations? And the more sophisticated the prompt, the higher the ratings of appropriateness. And also, the more likely they stated that if they were the supervisor, they would grant the request, the deadline extension, and so on. So also more effective. The takeaway is that like just translations are not very cross-culturally effective necessarily, but skillful prompting strategies can address that problem. Not fully, but they can increase the cross-cultural effectiveness of machine translation as we have it now. So that means we need AI literacy or literacy in AI mediated communication. People need to be competent in terms of knowing basically how the tools work, like just in general terms. They need to have a positive attitude towards using it, a positive attitude towards learning, and they need to be able to apply the tool in a critical yet effective way. So knowing the limitations and guarding against them. And a key takeaway would be that companies need to teach that. It will also help, let's say, minority language speakers to see, okay, it's not me that is maybe experiencing glitches in the technology. It's the remaining shortcomings. So I think the negative psychological or psychosocial effects can really be mitigated if we have people knowing more about the technology and using it more confidently and more competently. And I'll skip the research implications for you because I think you're more interested in the practical engaging part. I think I'm at the end of my speaking time, and I really look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tenzer, for your informative and truly engaging presentation. I think it's fascinating to see how AI can be viewed as either an asset or a liability, depending on its technological uncertainties and the psychosocial effects it creates. Now I'd like to invite Professor King Huang to begin the discussion on the themes Professor Tenzer has presented before we open the floor for audience questions. In the meantime, please post your questions to Q&A box. Let me briefly introduce Dr. Huang. She's an assistant professor of interpersonal communication at LMU here in LA. Her research examines the human communication in technology-embedded context using a social scientific approach. She investigates how people use media and technology in their daily lives to enhance relationships, as well as the consequences that occur when these technologies fall short of expectations. Dr. Huang's scholarship has been recognized with top paper awards at both International Communication Association and National Communication Association. Professor Huang.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the introductions. And also thank you, Professor Tenzer, for the great presentations. So I'm gonna moderate the Q&A sections. I see there were some questions coming in. So let's get started with just a quick like thing-oriented questions. So the first one is that you mentioned there was a lot of like cultural differences that was involved in multilingual team. And due to those differences in both cultural background and each person's AI literacy, team members sometimes will develop very different degree of reliance on AI mediated communication and also develop different mental model for what AI is. And those mental model can itself carry some power dynamics. So for example, some people may think about AI as a team members, use word like, oh, it's an assistant, it's a friend, or even a colleague, right? And some might really, happy about AI's work and call AI the expert or mentor, right? And you can see they have different relational implications with those kind of words. And also there were still people who was like, no, AI was just a tool. I would not use any human-like metaphor to describe it. So how will this different mental model influence, how people integrate AI in their teamwork and also shape the team dynamic?
I mean, I find those metaphors really interesting to call it a friend or a colleague or an expert. And that reminds me of a recent paper in organization science, Anthony et al. And they categorized AI in three ways people can understand it. So you mentioned just a tool. So people who consider it just a tool will use it to enhance what they do, right? To support their work, but they still think they themselves are firmly in charge. So saying, okay, I have AI help me draft something, but then I check it. So they trust their own expertise more, I think, than they do trust the AI. Now, if AI is a mediator, it could be seen as something that makes communication possible. So consider a multilingual team that says, okay, we run everything through the translator so that everyone can read in their own language. That facilitates, that enables what we do. I think here it's not so much about, do I trust the AI, but do I trust that it really gives us a shared understanding? And I think the examples that I mentioned of like things being lost in translation can be a barrier here, like new misunderstandings coming up. The most interesting one is, of course, the most interesting AI concept is what you mentioned. If you consider it a teammate, like a counterpart, as Anthony et al. Call it. And this has a lot of implications. I mean, you could think of power implications. If, I don't know, if there's a disagreement in the team, then AI could be seen as like the tiebreaker. Someone could always be the person saying, let's say what the AI thinks. So this could actually become a very influential team member. And those who have more literacy probably can use it more smartly as an ally. So I don't know, there could be new distortions or trust. I think you also research trust, right? So it's no longer then trust just between humans as we've traditionally studied it, but it's a trust between human, AI, human, right? This is a combination. So I think that has very profound impact on how things work. And the chaos is rather perfect if different people in the same team have different mental models of what the AI is. Is it just a tool, or do we accept it seriously as a colleague, right?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the human AI, human trust. That was
Mm-hmm.
very exciting concept. So from my understanding, team members, they themselves have different level of trust towards
Mm-hmm.
AI, and also how they each use AI can also shape the trust among the team
Yeah.
members, right? Like you mentioned, some team member might consider other team member who purely rely on AI generated text, as less capable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on this process, this triadic human AI human
Yeah.
trust process? And is it possible that the trust towards AI actually negative reduce our trust
Mm-hmm.
towards our teammates, right? Because once we adopted, there was errors, and we need to attribute those errors, and
Yeah,
sometimes we
yeah,
can
yeah,
choose
yeah,
to
yeah.
attribute there, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, it's really a challenge to trust research because so far that was just between humans and it was typically dyadic. Me,
Yeah.
the trustor, you, the trustee. Now, the trustee can also be the AI and you using the AI. So our relationship, if it's mediated by AI, will be triadic in terms of there's another trustee between us. And probably people have some like baseline trust level towards other team members, humans, but
Mhm.
also baseline trust level towards AI. And I mean, if the trust in the human is higher and an error occurs, then probably people will say, "Wow, that was an AI glitch. Let's try to fix that. Let's improve our prompting. I don't know. Let's fine tune the system." So they won't blame the human. But if the trust in the system is higher than it is in the human, you could also imagine that.
Yeah.
And an error occurs, people will say, well, the AI does a great job. It's awesome. So it must be you who messed it up. So I think if people overtrust the AI, this can actually make the human appear more incompetent. And I mean, if people have low trust in both, this can, I think, compound each other. And that's, I think, the problem that we see when people get clearly AI generated messages and they don't actually trust the human sending it so much, but even less if they use like a faulty system. And I mean, I just talked this afternoon to Vastaras, the scholar who founded X Culture. I don't know if you know that. It's like a virtual team project for students trying out virtual teams. And so this is becoming the biggest topic in this worldwide student project. That people are really being triggered by AI generated messages with the long dashes, as I mentioned, so they get really negative attributions with that. So I think there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, actually, there were several questions was asking about that specific
Mhm.
implications, right? When we recognize it's AI generated contents, and I'm sure all the instructor have some experience when you
Yeah, yes.
recommend some writing for your students look highly AI generated look like. So one of the questions the student asks is, what are the biggest barriers company face when integrating those AI communication tool into the multilingual teams? From
Mhm.
your research, would you like to share some of your findings there?
Well, I think the biggest barrier are the people. I think you need to convince them that this is really something that helps them. I think you need to carefully bring them all on board because, I mean, just talk to different people in your family or within your colleagues, you will get like opposite ideas. So I think we need companies need to cultivate that AI literacy.
Mhm.
And then, of course, they also need the tech support. So they need proper training for how the tools work. What can they do? What can they not do? They need prompting workshops so that people can make the most of it. And I think they also need clear accountability rules, right? What happens when AI makes a consequential mistake, right? How is accountability then assigned? I think companies need to be much more proactive in working with that and
Yeah.
taking it further. If we want to address also the technological limitations, they can fine tune the AI models to their own needs, right? So Stefan, the colleague I'm working with, has done a study with BMW, the car company,
Mhm.
on fine tuning a model on embodying the corporate values. So fine tuning it on mission, vision statements, value example scenarios, so that the corporate AI will actually promote those values in the suggestions it makes, like in an HR chatbot and so on. So both the technological and the human side, I think, needs to be actively addressed by companies.
Yeah, I like that you emphasize a lot of barriers was actually still from the human. And I guess that's one of the inquiry about that one is what type of pre-existing relational factors in workplace may influence how
Mm-hmm,
team member attribute those errors that potentially was from a
mm-hmm,
technical error,
mm-hmm.
right?
I think what's very important is psychological safety, right? If a team feels psychologically safe, if people feel that they won't be harshly criticized for making if this will be like benevolently received,
Mhm.
then it's probably also more likely that people will not personally be blamed for any errors and glitches. Now, if you have more like a blaming culture, then team members will more likely jump to conclusion saying, yeah, Schmidt always messes up anyway. So if there's an AI error, it will be seen as a human shortcoming. So that's one point. Then, of course, team familiarity. I
Mhm.
think if a team has been working with each other for a while, they know each other's communication styles. They get attuned to how this person would express criticism. So if someone is a very like modest, friendly, harmony-oriented person, and suddenly there's a message that gives a very blunt no to something, then people will say, okay, that's not you. That doesn't sound like you. So this sounds off because it's AI generated and not this sounds off because you are weird. So I think that mutual familiarity also helps. And I mean, pre-established trusting relationships before the tool comes in would also greatly help. But of course, these are harder to establish in the first place when we have a virtual setting with little face-to-face contact and the language barriers.
Yeah, I totally agreed. And then there was one more questions. It's actually one group of my students in my relational con class. They are looking into the emotional connection between AI and human. So,
Mhm.
but if certain part of the team member become over reliant on AI and
Yeah,
even develop those emotional connection with
yeah,
them, how will this potentially influence their
yeah.
workplace relationship?
I mean, that's an interesting one. I mean, people establishing emotional connections to AI. I think you've all read in the news that like that tragic story of the boy who basically took his life because some misguided AI model said he should.
Yeah.
So that shows how far that can go. Typically, it won't be that extreme, but still, I mean, isn't it terribly convenient to have ChatGPT provide psychological support? Haven't we all done that? I mean, I admit I have, right? I'm asking, okay, I have this and that problem. What could I do? And the thing is, the AI always listens. It's always available. It doesn't judge you. It never really contradicts, right? It's very, very supportive in whatever you throw at it. And people are not like that typically. I mean, I think real relationships between people, they arise from mutual vulnerability, right? You share something, you get a response, you negotiate. And I mean, that takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of effort. Sometimes you don't get what you wanted to hear. So people are tempted to turn to the AI that's so much easier than the unpredictable humans. And if people prefer that to actual human communication, it can worsen or impair the relationship formation. So my point would be use it as emotional support to some extent if you are like disadvantaged language wise, but don't ever use it as a replacement for real human exchange. Does that make sense? I mean, you know much more about the relational issues than I do.
Yeah, and then we have Dr. Philip Lackman, and he has a questions about what do you think is the danger of AI discouraging people from learning foreign language and being sensitive to cultural differences?
I mean, there are no studies on that yet, but it would be very interesting to conduct those because I do see that as a real danger among some people because I mean, all those who have studied foreign languages, you know how hard it is. And I've seen those conversations, even on LinkedIn, where people debate like language education in high schools. Why do we still make our students, our kids, spend so much time and effort on that? Wouldn't it be better for them to learn whatever, the natural sciences, because AI can do all that for us? So I do see it as a real danger, but I mean, what does that do to face-to-face communication? Then there are those people who say, well, but it can also translate synchronously. And I've done that during travels, like talked to the AI and it like translated live, but this is very awkward. So I think it would be incredibly important for people to understand that it can only carry them so far. But it will be interesting to see the actual effect materializing a few years down the road.
Yeah. And then our student actually have a related questions about
Mm-hmm.
that. So your research argued that the AI mediated literacy is very essential for both minority and majority language
Mm-hmm.
user. And what skills should be including in an AI literacy training program from global team, or what kind of
Mm-hmm.
leadership training programs should we prepare students from this kind of
Mm-hmm.
scenario?
So, I mean, we could start by just picking apart what is AI literacy. And I called it comfort, competence, and understanding. First of all, understanding is just like how is it trained and how does it produce language, just like some basic background on the workings of large language models, generative AI. That already helps to see, okay, it's probabilistic and it's based on the text it crawls and so on. But then, I mean, also show positive use cases to increase the comfort, to take away the like that perception of threat. And
Yeah.
some people really see it as a threat. And I mean, show them that it won't replace them, but it will augment them. right? I love that slogan of saying AI won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without AI. Saying it really can boost your productivity if you use it right. And then just the hands-on skills, teaching how does the tool that we have in the company, how does that work concretely? And so the prompting workshops that I mentioned. I think those 3 steps would be a good start, at least.
Yeah, I think those are very great steps. And then we also have like a very practical questions. It's like how can students gain experience with AI tools so they can feel prepared when using them in like international internships or jobs, which was I think it's a very relevant questions to a lot of students here nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I would say just play with it, right? I mean, don't cheat on your exams or term papers, but try out all different kinds of prompting strategies and see what it gives you. I think, I mean, I'm using it a lot to idea brainstorm, to to vet ideas, but also just to edit my writing as a non-native English speaker. Try different things and see what you get, but always use your critical thinking, saying, is that any good? So don't take it as the gospel, but evaluate it critically, and then you see what works and stay up to date. Be aware that the technology is evolving rapidly, and what you learned in September this year may no longer apply with the model updates. So be prepared for, yeah, lifelong learning, and always like trying to stay on top. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think those are great advice. And I do sense there was a lot of anxiety right now with AI tours, with students use AI tours and how well they can learn those. So those are great insights. Yeah, so I think we go through most of the questions. There was one like a small indications. AI do have this tendency to be people pleasing. How
Uh-huh.
likely would that kind of tendency raise new conflicts in a team environments, right? So usually before when people fight, you will have teammates coming and they try to sue people down and try to let people come up with a solution. But sometimes when people each go to their own AI for that problems, it might get escalated, right? So have you seen
Yeah.
any of those research in your previous projects?
I actually haven't seen any research on that. I just witnessed open AI changing the model subsequently. I mean, you've seen that probably. That one version of ChatGPT was like horribly, I don't know, always agreeing to anything you said.
Yeah.
And I think they have then toned that down at least slightly. And I think that also needs to be included in people's knowledge about it, that there might really be a bias in trying to please you rather than giving you honest feedback. And I mean, I've really tried that. I add to my prompts, be honest. This is very simple. But then the critical stuff comes out.
Right.
So, I mean, make that a common procedure for people to ask for like a more open judgment. Those small tweaks can already help, at least a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think we are close to the end of the webinar,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm gonna give the space to Professor Park, yeah, to wrap up the webinars. Yeah,
Thank you for the conversation.
Okay.
It was great
Yeah.
fun.
yeah,
Thank you so much to both of you. And Professor Tenzer, if you don't mind that, I saved my final question. So your scenarios suggest different leadership strategies or communication norms depending on whether AI is highly effective or more, prone to error.
Mm-hmm.
How should leaders, you think, that adjust their team communication norms across the 4 situations as AI involvement increases?
Mm-hmm. I think the communication norm should definitely be to include human judgment always, like to have a human in the loop
Uh-huh.
and to
Mm.
not like overly rely on only playing AI generated messages back and forth.
Okay.
And I think then you would have a safeguard in it
Hmm.
to make people really responsible of checking what they send out. And I think then the trust issue might also be mitigated.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, there are a lot of people, ironically, they keep saying that the more that we become dependent on AI or technology, and actually that it become more important to communicate as a human being. So the human element has increasingly become more important as the
yeah.
technology advance. Would you agree with that?
I mean, at some point, you can probably differentiate yourself
Okay.
by communicating with your own voice. I
Hmm.
mean, if you scroll through LinkedIn, students are probably not on LinkedIn yet, but I think you are. And so many posts now, they sound all alike, right? With the emojis, and you know exactly that person hasn't written it.
Right.
But now I start noticing posts that actually
Hmm.
sound like a person has written it.
Right.
So I think that's really an encouragement. Use it as an enhancement, but don't have it replace you, your voice and your uniqueness.
Right. Okay. Great. I like to share my final thought before we wrap up this webinar. I know most of our audience today are students. So despite the benefit of technology that enables us to work remotely and virtually, it is still very important to have first-hand cultural experiences if you want to pursue international business career. So I strongly encourage you to participate in alumni study abroad program before you graduate. In addition to capstone course, management department is going to offer two special international business courses for the upcoming spring semester sponsored by the Center for Asian Business. The first course is called the Exploring Asian Culture course, designed for the freshmen and sophomores, which incorporates a 2-week field trip to Korea and China. All right. And the other course is a global sustainability course designed for juniors and seniors, which includes a 2-week field trip to South Korea and Mongolia. So tomorrow, actually, you'll see the event hosted by the Alumni Study Abroad office. There will be a table set up. If you want to pick up more detailed information, please feel free to come by and get more detailed information about these two courses. Now, I like to conclude the webinar. Once again, Professor Tenzer, danke schön, dass Sie heute Abend dabei sind.
Ah, sehr,
Professor
sehr
Huang.
gerne. Hat Freude
I
gemacht.
studied
Thank you
German
so
for three
much. It
years
was
in
a
high
pleasure.
school, but I almost forgot all of that. Professor Huang, thank you so much for leading the discussion on this timely and important topic. Thank you so much, everyone who joined the webinar today. I hope you have enjoyed the program. Before you leave, I would really appreciate if you could complete a short survey at the end of this webinar. Thank you again. Bye.
Bye bye.